the events coordinator for Heirloom next door. We are collaborating with Helix, this space. They so graciously offered to let us use this space for events like this where we have more people. If you've ever been to the bookstore, it's quite small. You know that not very many people can fit in there at once. So we're here tonight. Helix is a nonprofit dedicated to helping school-aged children gain work skills. So this space used to be a coffee shop where teenagers could come and practice career skills. It's not a coffee shop right now, but they're still working in the mission of helping young people. So that's what Helix is. That's why we're here. And tonight you are here for a lecture, and Brian is going to be giving this lecture on the Library of Alexandria. So please make yourself comfortable. I don't have much more intro than that. I really want to let you take it away. But I'm so excited that so many people showed up tonight. This is great. Thank you.
Thank you, Helix, and thank you, Heirloom Books. Thank you to the Carver Tennis family for supporting me in this endeavor to commemorate Chelsea's life. Not her now. Not yet. This was a work of love. This is something that Chelsea and I talked about for years, about me giving a lecture to help promote her business, her newfound store, and unfortunately that didn't happen while she was with us. So this is for her. And now I'm going to nerd out. So, the Library of Alexandria. In Greek, it's Bibliotheca Alexandrina, library. The concept is rather ancient. It precedes the famous Library of Alexandria that we're going to be talking about today. We'll go through a few examples of preceding libraries, specifically in Egypt, which is my format. Just to give you an idea that this thing didn't just pop up at 9:23 on Thursday morning, right? It was the result of a long process of a tradition of knowledge and why knowledge is transmitted and to whom knowledge is transmitted. We're not talking about a public library. We're not talking about, going down the street or even going next door to a bookstore. These were exclusive properties that were, in this case, owned by the royal family, the Macedonian Greek family who ruled Egypt. So I hope everyone can see the image. It's not too white out or anything. Very romanticized image, one of my favorites. Still haven't found the artist who actually painted this, but this is supposedly a reconstruction of the Library of Alexandria. So we have 3 books that I used for this presentation. There are other authors and other publications that I did not include, but this one by Confora, very easily read, reads like a novel almost. It is nonfiction. Very good book. The Library of Alexandria by Euclid is also very useful. The one on the far right is, I believe, still currently out of print. I have a first edition from 1953. It was the only useful thing my ex gave me. I do appreciate that. So these are some of the main sources. We'll be tapping into other online sources that you can further investigate. So the first thing that I want to bring up is a study by Maurice Halbach, who was a French sociologist, studying memory, specifically memory in the context of cultural and individual memory. Why we remember things that we remember. Why are they important? Why do we forget things that aren't so important? How does memory change? So, he was a French sociologist and philosopher known for developing the concept of collective memory. These ideas are summarized by the 4 dimensions that he brings up of cultural memory, each aid in explaining the origin of writing, the cohesive power of the written word, cultural identity, and its appropriation. Now, appropriation is a magic word, right? Because especially when we talk about Western appropriation of non-Western cultures and traditions, that's a hot button topic. And it's still something that's being debated and dialogue, spoken about in society today. So collective memory is the shared pool of knowledge and information of collective memories of 2 or more members of a social group. I would argue against 2 or more. Just because I have a shared memory with a family member or a friend or my husband doesn't necessarily make it a collective memory. I would think a collective memory would be a larger group. So, with all due respect, Mr. Helix, I do disagree with that. But I think that this information is interesting. Now, most of us, and here I'm going to read the demography of the group, might remember Coco, the gorilla. She's been gone, I think 2 decades now. And then, of course, Mr. Fred Rogers. Right? Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. Yeah. And avid, animal lover, but he encountered Coco, who was a lowland mountain gorilla, who was raised, within the confines of San Francisco, I believe. But she was the study of language and cognition, primarily through American Sign Language. And the next slide that I'm going to bring up is called mimetic memory. Basically, are you mimicking things because you're imitating somebody else, like a mime, right? But Coco proved to us in cognitive theory and also in primatology that she could actually creatively make sentences, creatively on her own, not through, she had a basic vocabulary, but she was able to put those vocabulary words together into some sort of sentence, some sort of pattern. On the far right-hand side, this is Coco with one of her earliest kittens, Ball. Coco actually named her Ball because she was a small little ball of fluff. And Ball unfortunately got out of the compound. She was hit by a car. She died. And whenever Coco's trainer had told her that Ball was dead, Coco she put her finger to her nose and to her cheek and say, "Cry, Coco, cry, Ball, Coco, cry." So this cognitive, certainly not cognitive dissonance. I mean, this animal truly understood what was going on. So how can we apply that to human cultures? So let's move to the next slide. So the second one is the memory of things. Private everyday objects such as beds, chairs, clothing, tools, cars, can represent concepts of practicality, aesthetics, comfort, and personal or social identity. And of course, this first sentence, that's going to be culture, right? Just because we have something that is culturally important to us in the West and America doesn't mean that someone in, say, Zimbabwe has the same sort of cultural aesthetics. And this can vary depending on age, gender identity, normativity. So all of these things are going to help us define what the Library of Alexandria was, what was kept, who wrote it, who read it, and what was destroyed. The world of things not only reminds us of the constant present, but of levels of individual and collective past. And this ties into our identity as a people. Let's say, in the Jewish tradition, you have Sabbath, you have Torah, you have all of these sacred books and rituals and things that identifies a particular population that doesn't necessarily translate to other people. That doesn't make them any less important. It just means that that is a different population. That is a different narrative. So semantic memory. This is where I really like to get into stuff, because semantic basically is a fancy word that just simply means meaning. What sort of meaning do you place in an object, in a book, in a person, in a physical location? What does it mean to you, but then also when does it lose its meaning? Because obviously that's the history of human civilization. We have lost things, like the Library of Alexandria, because it no longer served a purpose of that particular time period. So, one of our earliest examples of writing is basically a receipt. Everybody thinks, oh, the origins of writing, it must be, these great myths of the gods and, kings and stuff like that. No, it's basically, I'm giving you 4 sheep, and you're giving me your daughter for my son in marriage. That's the origin of writing. However unsexy it sounds, that's basically what the origin of writing is. First appeared in Mesopotamia. I know any of my Egyptology friends will probably debate this. There have been some recent finds in Egypt that might contradict this, but right now, for the moment, we're going with Mesopotamia. So Mesopotamian libraries could be divided into 3 categories. Temple libraries, which are not uncommon in the ancient world. Palace libraries, so basically annals, documents of the king, proclamations of the king, saying, oh, look at me, I'm Ashurbanipal, I'm so great, I'm awesome, look at my library. And then libraries belonging to private individuals. And here's what's interesting, is that these libraries belonging to private individuals, kind of like we all have books, bookshelves in our own houses. These private individuals oftentimes will be confiscated during particular time periods by Mesopotamian, Sumerian cultures to be added into the collective of the royal archives. So basically, if, let's say, the current president, or any president in the United States, were to suddenly say, oh, Brian Smith, you've got 3,517 books on Egypt. I'm going to confiscate those, and I'm going to add them to the Library of Congress. So that's basically, kind of what we're looking at. And of course, it's the king who's going to argue against the king. So, Enheduanna, she is one of my favorites from very, very remote antiquity. She's the daughter of Sargon. She was a poetess. And I thought that it would be appropriate to mention her because of course, Chelsea not only being a writer, but also a bookstore owner and a businesswoman of herself. This is the first woman that we know, the first individual woman that we know who was not only literate, but held a high position in status in history. She's the first known author. Much of her work, for those Assyriologists, people who study in ancient Mesopotamia and Syria, regard her as being the first person to actually categorize different genres: literature, poetry, songs, wisdom books. So, if we're looking, and we will eventually look at Callimachus, the Library of Alexandria, she started. It was her. It was a woman. And that's rare in the ancient world. It's rather actually challenging even today in the 21st century. So she held the position of high priestess in the city of Ur. If you've heard of Ur, it sounds familiar. That's where Abraham came from in the biblical tradition, right? Or the Chaldees. She's credited with creating the paradigms of poetry, songs, and prayers, like I mentioned. So here is a small, I believe this is from the National Land. Somebody please email me to correct me, I'm sorry. A small disc where we have Enheduanna here surrounded by supplicants. There is an offering table with flames coming up, burning incense. And over here, this kind of, if you can see it, this kind of wedding cake shaped thing, that's a ziggurat. That's the foundation of a Mesopotamian temple. Right? The temple is on top. So she's performing her cultic duties. as not only the daughter of Sargon the Great, but also as a priestess. So ancient Egyptian libraries. Believe it or not, I'm not going to talk too much about this. Since the beginning of its history, papyrus was the preferred writing material in Egypt. It was produced in handy sheets, relatively carryable, which, whatever the writing material, all ancient cultures had repositories for important writings, and the Egyptians were certainly no exception. Buildings, which can be identified as libraries, are very rare in Egypt. We do have a few inscriptions. I want to show you one of the best known, the Temple of Horus at Edfu, where we actually have a listing of the collections that would belong to the library, including recipes for incense, like different types of incenses that would be mixed and made in order for special occasions like festivals or coronations. They are generalized conclusions based on architectural evidence and are speculative at best. So we don't really have, from Egypt, we don't have a lot of strong evidence of Egyptian libraries, although we do have strong evidence of an intellectual tradition from Egypt. So the intent of Egyptian libraries. We did this with Mesopotamia, now we're doing it in Egypt. They were repositories of texts served mainly three purposes. Texts which will be used in the future, so basically an archive, or what we traditionally think of a library, so let's save this writing for the future. And this include historical annals and accounts of the king, other cultural events. Text used in the present, textual material used for archival and reference purposes, which is written on papyrus, and it's temporal. So basically, write down what you need right now. The thing is, number two, papyrus was expensive, even though it was abundant in Egypt. There were literally papyrus farms, that were made for, specifically the industrial use and production of papyrus documents. So if you're a farmer, or if you're a weaver at home and you need, more than likely you're not going to be literate, right? 5%, maybe at best, 5% literacy rate. So if you can't read, you can't write, you want to record something like a marriage document, you would have to go to the nearest scribe and use a broken flake of ceramic or a broken flake of limestone called ostraca. And that scribe would basically have to copy down what you're saying. I live my gifts and belongings to such and such or whoever. But then you also had to have a lot of trust in that scribe. And we have plenty of mistakes where scribes got it wrong. So is that mimetic memory, where they're just copying down some sort of rote, pre-scribed text, or are they actually consuming the material from the individual? And sometimes scribes got it wrong. They either weren't well educated, or they lied to the person they were writing these texts for, to their benefit. Because at the end of the day, the scribe is still going to be paid. And the farmer or the weaver or whomever just has to trust that the account is secure. Provisional texts primarily are the ones that we have the most evidence for, specifically on the interior and exterior of coffins from Egypt, as well as the interior and exterior of Egyptian temples and tombs and private memorials. These are provisional in that they evoke the idea of the gods, the afterlife, a sense of judgment. I was the best person in the world, and that is science. So you've got to write that down, right? You've got to include that to make sure that everybody knows that you are the best person. So these provisional texts evolve, but again, that's probably another lecture. Okay, bookworm. So here's the damage to a German text. I hope you can see it. It's kind of pale. It has like these little rivulets of in a way, material. You have this cute little cartoon, emoji. Oh, I'm a bookworm. I'm so cute. I consume books, metaphorically, because I like to read. No, this is the little bastard. This is the one who actually eats the material. He, him, her, and their larvae actually plant eggs, lay their eggs within climates where these insects can thrive. And we even have in Egyptian, Greek, Mesopotamian text where they are recopying material that has been worm-eaten. And what they're referring to is this specific little thing. And so, yeah, when we talk about the bookworm, everybody's like, oh, you're a bookworm, you're a nerd, you're so smart. No, you're literally consuming books. And there's a lot of examples of this from all over the world, not just Egypt, Mesopotamia, or Greece. So, how do we combat bugs? In my household, cats. Our cats love to chase bugs. We live in a building that's probably in the mid-20s, 1920s or so. So, even though it's a really nice condo, there are occasionally bugs that will come into the house. You cannot tell me that in all of the millennia of ancient Egyptian history that they didn't have library cats. Even the Hermitage, right, museum in Russia, has cats, like generations of cats, where they chase down bugs, but they also chase down vermin, mice, rats, anything else that would actually cause harm to the collection. And so this is actually a friend of mine, Danica. She took this photograph and used this by permission from her. This is a cat at Philae Island, one of the last temples of ancient Egypt, where there is still a significant cat population. If you love cats and you're willing to donate, because it's an island, because of the pandemic, I can give you the email account to donate some money to help support these animals. Right now they don't have the medical expertise of someone coming in to spay and neuter the cats. And so that's unfortunate because cats replicate like crazy, just like rabbits. You keep them unchecked, and pretty soon you have 18 cats, and that's only like in 3 weeks. So, anyway, you can do that if you do. This is a little small. Sorry. So this is an image of an institution that is best known in Egyptology. Its actually literal translation is the House of Life. And this is where texts were copied, transcribed, and recorded, usually associated with the gods themselves, or the king. And so here we have an actual representation, kind of a footprint or a ground plan of the House of Life. At the center is Osiris, the god who died and was reborn, so there's kind of this cycle of death, renewal, life, knowledge associated with this. And then, of course, on the periphery, there are also other hieroglyphic signs, that indicate various other gods and goddesses associated with this House of Life institution. So the House of Life was more than a library. It was a kind of university. Here, books of all kinds were not only collected and classified, but were also written and handed down to younger generations, the scribes and priests. Doesn't mean that they actually learned their lesson, right? You ever get that paper back that has a minus on it? It looks like, somebody stuck a pig and lead all over the paper because there's so much red ink. Same thing with the ancient Egyptians, which makes them more human. They made mistakes. Scribal tools. So this is an artist palette, kind of like the watercolor kit that you can get at Walgreens, right? Same thing, just little cakes of techniques. This is a tube that has a reed pen that you pull out of. And this is the scribal palette. One dish is for the ink, one dish is for the water. This little sachet is actually for the coal, or the black powder that is used to paint or write in ancient Egypt. All of these tools are still going to be used and relevant for the Library of Alexandria. This is the typical chorus. Here's the library right there. You can see the schematic drawing of the floor plan. This is the footprint. The library is over here. It lists several different sorts of books or texts that are religiously composed. So the emergence of Greek intellect, in the simplest terms, humanism arrives with the Greeks. So humanism refers to how the Greek art of literature, the tradition, puts the human experience at the center of events. Think about it this way. Let me finish the sentence and then we'll come back to this. In contrast to the Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, which focuses on God as the center, the Greeks didn't do that. Yeah, they had a lot of Greek gods, but is anybody going to take moral advice from Zeus? No. So as long as you burnt incense and paid your homage to the gods, human beings are basically allowed to do whatever they want. And that's why democracy was employed. It was not a divine theocracy like we have in Egypt or Mesopotamia. That people were able to make their own decisions. Oh yeah, let's go to the temple and drink wine to Dionysus and get completely wasted. But the next day, we still have to sit in the assembly and decide and make our decisions about our community. And who are making these decisions? Men. No one. Men. Landowning, free men. So if you were a foreigner or a slave, even if you were an actor, you could not serve as a voting member in the Athenian assembly. So that says a lot about classical Greece. So while the Abrahamic faiths seek the divine godly perfection, the Greek humanists are interested in how each of us must come to grips with and make the best use of our inherent human imperfection. The Greeks see this struggle as fascinating, tragic, and painful. Hence, Greek drama. Right? Greek drama is going to be one of the main focal points of the Library of Alexandria. Epic poetry, specifically Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, is going to be the linchpin. It's going to be the anchor for so many, almost in my mind, too many scholars of the Library of Alexandria. To the point that, about 2nd century AD, that's what they were writing about, was the Iliad and Odyssey, correcting, making marginalia, colophons and side notes, into these older translations. It's like, okay, guys, let's move on. Let's start looking at how big the Earth is, or what is the moon made of. We do have those people as well, but they seem particularly obsessed with the Iliad and the Odyssey. So, our founding fathers, if we may call them that, are the philosophers Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Aristotle is going to be the most instrumental in the development of the Library of Alexandria, because Aristotle is actually the tutor of Alexander the Great. I love this slide. Talk about drinking the Kool-Aid, right? You've got Socrates, who taught Plato, Plato who taught Aristotle, and Aristotle is holding Alexander the Great. And so they're all passing down these kind of traditions of intellectualism, each in their own way. They didn't all believe the same thing. Plato is very different from Aristotle, very different from Socrates, but they each are going to have an instrumental part in the foundation of the intellectual institution of the Lyceum, the academy, Aristotle's academy in Athens, but also as kind of an established founding point of the Library of Alexandria. So we'll just follow up with Aristotle because he's the most recent in history. He also had the most direct influence with Alexander. Aristotle's intellectual range was vast, covering most of the sciences and many of the arts. So biology, botany, chemistry, ethics, history, logic, metaphysics, rhetoric, philosophy,